welcome to Kate Makes Things. I'm Kate and I'm a non-wool knitter and crocheter, and this is my podcast where I talk about my adventures in non-wool knit and crochet. All right, so let's get started. The only finished object that I have right now is not actually a knit or crochet object. It is a cross stitch object. So cross stitch was the very first craft that I learned to do. My mom taught me to cross stitch when I was like 5 or 6, and we got a kit at like a craft store, and I made a little crochet or a little cross stitch heart. It was, probably about that big. It was tiny, but it was cute and I loved it. And so for a good chunk of like my childhood and my teens, cross stitch was the craft that I went to. I was traveling last summer and I was up in Boston and stopped at a store that was fabric and yarn and all sorts of crafts, a little local indie store. And I wish I remember the name of it, but I don't. So if I will look it up and I'll add the name of it down below. But I got this kit for a safe space cross stitch, and I've been working on it for a while. There was a hot minute where I was working on it with people over my lunch breaks, and then that kind of fell through. So I went to a craft night last week and I took it and I was like, you know what, I'm gonna finish it. And it is mostly done. It does need to be put into its little hoop, little decorative hoop. So I do need to finish that piece of it, but let me put it in front of my face. There we go. But she is done. My safe space cross stitch is done. It is ready to sit on my desk at work. So I'm really excited about that. So only finished object right now is my space safe cross stitch. Other than that, you know me, I like tiny yarns. And so everything that I have started lately is taking a while because it's tiny yarns, but that's okay. I know that I am more comfortable wearing tiny yarns rather than like thicker Aran weight. And so I know that the finished objects of these will be right up my alley. It's taken a while to get there. But again, part of the reason that I wanted to do this podcast was to show you that it's okay for things to take a while. Because sometimes that's just how crafting works, is that things take a while. All right, so my first work in progress is one that I shared with you in my last video. It is my Posy tank. The design is by Along Avec Anna, and I am using knitting for olive pure silk. So when I spoke to you last, I was about halfway through the lace section, and you can see here, this was the progress keeper that I put in for that day. So I've made quite a bit of progress on it, especially given that it's a lighter fingering weight yarn. Finished the lace, have several inches of the body. I have not measured how much more of the body I want to knit. Let's see. I am a total, let's measure it right now. I have done about 10.5 inches of knitting on this tank top. So I feel pretty good about that. However, because we were starting to get into the colder months, and I realize that that is a bit of a misnomer here in the South, right? We're still in the 70s today, but at least somewhat colder months. I think progress on this guy is gonna slow down a little bit. It will be, because I still have quite a bit of stocking knit to go. So I think it will tend to be a project where I don't want to think too much and I just need to knit stocking knit forever and ever. This is what I'll pick up, but when I want a little bit more interest in my projects, I have a few other things that I'm working on that are going to give me that interest. So probably won't see a whole lot of progress on this one in the near future because it's silk, it's a tank top, we're getting out of that season, and so I'm slowing down on the wanting to make it right away, and I will probably around February or March, I'll be like, okay, let's finish this right in time to wear it for spring. So that is my Posy tank, bottom up tank top. All right, my next work in progress is my Nightshift shawl. So this is a designed by Andrea Mowry, and there is a cowl version of it that I think is just called the Shift. And then the Nightshift is a larger version of that. And so that's the one that I am doing. I bought this yarn a couple of years ago at the Yarn Patch here in Tennessee. Here's how it looks so far. I am really loving, like, from here up. I think it is looking really great. So the yarns that I am using, I decided that I only wanted to do 3 yarns instead of doing 6. The pattern calls for 6 different yarns, and I decided that I only wanted to do 3. And so I would have my yarns be like 1, 2, ABC, ABC instead of A, B, C, D, E, F, if that makes sense. So the yarns that I picked out for this were 2 colors of Barocco Medina, which is a really cool color changing yarn. So there's this blue and like a coppery brown, and the copper has a really cool, I wonder if you can see it. Probably not. The copper has a really cool shimmer to it, is the only way that I know how to describe it. So I am really loving this one. What is it called? The colorway is, well, I don't know which one is which. One is Taza and the other one is Biskra. So can't remember which one the blue is. But then the other one is a red that's also got some blue in it. So, and then the cream is just a bamboo pop. So those are the 3 colors that I decided to do. And because I only decided to do 3 colors instead of 6, I have had some interesting things happen with that. So in the pattern, right, you start with A as your background color, and then you go through each of your other colors, right? So A and B, A and C, easy peasy. And then it got to a point where it was A and D. But you know what? A and D were both the blue Barocco Medina. And so this section right here, you can see it. This section right here was a little bit mind-numbing to do because the colors were so similar. I tried to get it to where I had the section of yarn that was mainly blue and then the section of yarn that was mainly the copper. And it worked somewhat, but I realized that I could not do that for the entire 20 rows that section called for. So I decided to skip ahead and go back to the white. So I am trying to keep up with the colors as the pattern calls for, but I am playing around with it a little bit depending on what it calls for, because I have realized that when it calls for this color and the same color to be right next to each other, it just doesn't work super well. I had a similar problem when I had the blue as the background, but it was in the copper section, and then the red color was this section right here. Was again a little bit like mind-numbing. I was going cross-eyed. I needed like all of the good light to do that section. So it was really interesting. But it worked its way out pretty quickly. But the way that the pattern works is that you do 20 rows of each like section. So you got the slip ones, the slip twos, the slip ones, the slip twos, the slip ones, the slip twos. So the first time that I had to rip back was after the 2 blue section. I got the first 10 rows done and I was like, you know what? I don't want to do another 10 rows of this. So I am gonna switch to the blue and the cream, and I am going to go back to row 1 and just do the first 10 rows again. Well, turns out can't do that. You have to do rows 1 through 10 and then rows 20 through 30, or whatever it is. 1 through 10, 11 through 20, I think is roughly where it ends up being. But I did the first little piece, and then I was gonna skip the second piece and do the single slips here. And I got all the way through it, and I was starting on another slip 2 section, and I was like, this is not working out. So I had to run my lifeline through here, rip it back, start again from that section, all right? My other problem is that I keep missing the increases. So you always increase on the right side, you always increase in the same place, and I keep forgetting about it every single time. So I've ripped back at least twice to fix where I have forgotten increases, and my count just gets way off. The other thing was that I wasn't paying attention to the directions, and when you switch the background color, you have to switch on a wrong side row, and I didn't. So I tried to just keep going on without ripping it back. I made it like 5 rows in, and I was like, okay, this is not working again. So I have now ripped back like 3 times. I've gotten really good at adding the lifeline in between the stitches. The hardest part is finding the correct stitches on the I-cord edge because it's an I-cord edge. And so it's hard to tell what goes with which row. I will say the I-cord edge is working out beautifully though. This is the first project I've ever done with an I-cord edge, and it turns out that they're not that hard to do. So if that's something that's been scaring you, don't let it. They are really not that difficult to do. It's just slipping the stitches in the correct order, or in the correct way when you need to, and it's an easy way. And that was something that I was always like, oh, an I-cord edge, that seems difficult. But like most things in knitting, when you try it, it's really not as difficult as you think it's gonna be. I also have added a stitch marker so that I will remember where my make one is supposed to be. Yeah, it's been interesting. I am liking the way that it's turning up. I'm really excited to see how it finishes out. I am using a smaller yarn than it calls for. I think it calls for like a worsted weight, and these are sport or DK. I have the hardest time keeping track between what sport and DK are and which one is lighter and which one is heavier. I think it goes fingering DK sport, but so I'm using a lighter yarn, so it might be a slightly smaller shawl than calls more shawlette, if you will, but I think it'll be really great as we come up on winter. So that is my Nightshift shawl. And let me go ahead and add a progress keeper here so you can see how. So when I get back and finally do something again, you'll be able to see where I was. All right, progress keeper added. All right, so, and then my last work in progress is the Weekday Tee by Amy Sure Makes, and I am using the Loops Luxe Plant-Based Princess. The yarn is unfortunately discontinued because the brick and mortar store for Loops has closed. So I don't know if there's a place to find it anywhere online, but I will tell you I am loving working on it. Again, technically this is like a DK or a sport weight yarn. I think it's DK, but I find that it is knitting up a little bit closer to a fingering weight, at least as far as the Weekday Tee pattern calls for. So the Weekday Tee, it's a raglan with a compound raglan, a scooped neckline, and then it's got like a faux cabling lace through the raglan that is really, really gorgeous. It would have been perfect for my trip to the pumpkin patch today, but it is slower going than I thought. And also I just started it like yesterday or the day before. So, yeah. So I do have my gauge swatch for this because I wanted to show you when I tested out, so a size 4 needle on this and then a size 3 needle here. And you can see that I've got my yarn overs to show me which side was which. When I was working them up before I washed it, they seemed to be basically the same, right? And then after I blocked it, you could really tell that the 4 like worked, it's like loosened up a whole lot, whereas the 3 kind of kept its shape. So that is what I'm going with. And I'm actually getting 6.4 stitches per inch. And I'll write a blog post about how I get my gauge and how I test my gauge swatches and measure them, and how I end up with things like 6.4 stitches per inch. Because that's odd, isn't it? But yeah, so 6.4 stitches per inch, which is actually 0.4 stitches per inch more than the pattern calls for. So yeah. So I actually have a slightly smaller gauge, even though this is technically a DK weight yarn and not a fingering weight. And I find that a lot with plant-based yarns or non-wool yarns at least, that they don't always match what you think it's going to be based on what the weight is called. So I find it better to look at the gauge, or to just work up the gauge myself and then find a project from there that it will work with. But I am not very far at all with this one. It's gotten kind of wrapped up on itself. You can tell that I did not measure my long tail cast on very well, and so I've got a nice little chunk of yarn there that I've like tried to tie up so I can keep it out of the way. But I'm literally like 2 rows in. And the reason for that is because of the way that the pattern is written. It is completely clear what I need to do, but the way that it's written, it will say like, okay, section 1, and I think this is because of the compound raglan, that like is supposed meant to follow the shape of the shoulder rather than being just a line right here. It's meant to kind of with your shoulder, which I think is really cool and should be really flattering. But I think it requires a slightly different construction, because sometimes you're adding raglans, you're adding increases just on one piece, or you're not adding increases for a little bit, or whatever it may be. So, but the way that it's written is it'll be like section 1, work 10 rows of all raglan, right? And then it's got another box somewhere that says all like this is what an all raglan row looks like. But then there's also that faux cable lace in there, so then the lace charts are on a separate page. I typically use Knit Companion when I am working on a project, because I can just check off things and highlight, and I love Knit Companion. If you haven't used it before, it's great, and Very Pink Knits has some really great tutorials on how to use it. But I'm usually a Knit Companion knitter, and I keep it on my phone, and that way I always have my project, or I always have my pattern with me. This one I have to print out, and I got half of it printed out, or half of what I needed printed out at my home printer yesterday, and then something went on the fritz, and so I've got to figure it out, because you know, a printer never works when you want or need it to. And that has been an ongoing issue at work this year too, so I'm particularly frustrated with printers. But I need to print out the rest of those pages so I can keep going on it. I think it's gonna be such a gorgeous fall sweater. I mean, look at this color. The color is called Copper Downspout, which is a really gorgeous like burnt orange. I'm really excited about the detailing on the raglan. I thought I didn't pay great attention, and so I thought it was going to be a real cable, and I was like, oh, I get to try cables, but it's just a faux lace cable. It'll still look really gorgeous though. And I'm really excited about it. She has lots. Amy Sure Makes has like so many gorgeous patterns that fit my style. Yeah, that fit my style. So I am excited about this one as my first make of hers. So yeah, that is my Weekday Tee. Again, like 2 rows in, and I'll add a progress keeper so that we can see how I'm doing the next time that I pop on. And last but not least, we have acquisitions. I only have a couple of acquisitions, and that's because the month of August was the Great Tennessee Yarn Tour. So a ton of shops in East Tennessee and Central Tennessee work together to do a big Tennessee yarn crawl for the month of August. So you can see all of the shops here. I had planned to go to more shops than I did, and I had planned to make an entire video that was just me talking about my yarn tour experience. But that didn't happen because I got COVID, and the beginning of the year was wild. So only got to visit my home shop and then 2 others, but got a lot of cute things, and visited some shops that were out of the way that I don't normally get to visit. So the big thing about this is, the thing that makes it a yarn tour is that you get a pattern book with 4 different patterns for mini skeins that use mini skeins. I think there's a page in here that just shows all of them. Yeah, so you get a bunch of mini skein patterns. And then each shop has its own mini skein that they sell you that is made in conjunction with a dyer that is local to them. It's a really, really cool idea. Unfortunately, all of the mini skeins are wool. So I can't buy them, and I can't use them. So it helps me keep a budget on the yarn tour, which is nice. But yeah, a little frustrating. So every year my feedback is, please, sir, do some non-wool things. But yeah, it is a lot of fun to go around and visit all the stores. Some of them will have a special pop-ups from indie dyers or trunk shows or special patterns. I got a free skein of yarn from my home store when I picked up my bag. You get the bag, you get the patterns, and it's just a fun time. So I got a couple of things at these yarn stores. So I got to go to 2. I went to the Carriage House in Kingsport, Tennessee, and then Yarntiques in Johnson City, and then my home store of Loopville was where I picked up my bag. So at the Carriage House, the main thing that I picked up was stitch markers, including my gorgeous Project Progress Keeper stitch markers here. It's like a little light bulb terrarium. Really, really pretty. So grabbed those at the Carriage House. Also grabbed a pair of really cute earrings, or actually a couple pairs of really cute earrings, because they have a lot of stuff, not just the, not just knitting and crochet stuff. They also carry some clothes and some fair trade items. So it's if you're in Kingsport, Tennessee, it's a really cool place to check out. And then the second store that I got to go to was Yarntiques in Johnson City. And while at Yarntiques, I got this little kit for a cuddle buddy. The kit is by Plymouth Yarn Company, and then it came with the patterns. And the owner of the store was very lovely and actually gave me both the knit and the crochet pattern so that I could decide which way I wanted to do it. But it's real cute. I have an idea for who is gonna get the fox cuddle buddy. There were some other types of animals too, but I really liked the fox and the orange and the gray. I've got an orange thing going on right now. But yeah, a very cute little fox cuddle buddy. Perfect for a new baby. So yeah. Oh, and then like I said, I picked up my bag at my home store of Loopville, and Loopville gave me a skein of the Juniper Moon Farms Summer Solstice paints. That's a purpley, this one is a linen cotton viscose mix. It's a size 2, so I think that's a fingering weight. And this color is called Hammock Haven, and it's mostly purple with some light greens and oranges built in there too. That's all of the shopping I've been doing. I do have some yarn on order because I want to do my very first stranded colorwork sweater. And so I'm really excited to try that with a cotton yarn, because when you Google it, everyone's like, well, you gotta use wool. And I'm like, well, that's not an option. So I am excited to share that journey, especially with you, to see how the color work is going, and how to do it with a non-wool yarn, because it's just a new experience, a new adventure, and hopefully you can learn from that as well. Thank you so much for watching today. I hope you have a great rest of the month of October, and follow me on Instagram, see me on Ravelry, keep track of all the work that I'm doing, and I will see y'all in a bit. Thanks.